Absolutely. We hope that this will spark interest in telling some more labor stories, because Tennessee's the same way. We had a labor school down in Sewanee that no one ever talks about.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Mark Brown is a Nashville screenwriter and author of a script for a new network drama, Redneck Army, which follows coal miners as they organize in the early 1900s against the companies and the state. He's also our next guest. Mark, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. That's kind of a nice segue you just gave into the issues that we're dealing with in Redneck Army. It's like different times, different places, same management, huh?
It really is amazing how similar, how similar so many of these stories are. Doing this program has given us the opportunity not only to, look into and just read about, labor struggles that are happening nationally, but also to talk to workers nationally. We've talked to workers from Zambia, from Bolivia, and Indonesia, and it's really amazing how wow. Bosses suck everywhere at all times.
Exactly.
They're always terrible.
And no, you don't have the right to assemble, and no, you can't ask for peaceful redress of your grievances. Funny how that happens. Which actually, that's part of why this story that we're trying to tell is so important. Because it still resonates. And one thing I will say, I've got to say, I'm co-creator of Redneck Army along with a local screenwriter named Whitney Resides, an amazing, talented writer, producer, and actor. And we've put this together. And a little piece of news I can kind of give you that has come up here recently. We're working with a producer now, and we're in the process of shaping how this is actually going to appear. Not to get too far off into the weeds of TV and film production, but with a film, you've got a script, and it's a finite sort of thing. You're shooting something that's going to be on screen for 2 hours. With a television show, we conceive this as a 3-season, 8-episode per season, 24 total episode work, kind of somewhere between like a limited series and like an ongoing series. Mm-hmm. But once you get into it with producers and people, there's all sorts of negotiations and whatnot. And obviously a lot of this comes down to who's willing to write the check for it, because it's a period piece. This is set in 1920, 1920, and 21 and 22. Period pieces cost a little bit more than doing a contemporary piece. But we've been having these discussions lately, and getting back to what we were talking about. This is such a fascinating story. I've talked about it. What this show does is we start in the run-up to what was called the Battle of Matewan. Kind of some background, I'm sure your listeners might know this. The United Mine Workers were trying to organize those open shop coal fields of southwestern West Virginia in the early 1920s. Basically, you had a feudal system there in the Tug River Valley. You had these barons, these lords of industry, whatever you want to call them, who came in. It's another thing just fascinating about this whole story. There are just these huge socioeconomic forces that come to bear here. This goes back to a land grab in the 1890s when the Norfolk and Western Railroad decided to come through the Tug River. Land speculators came in from Illinois, from New York, from Florida, bought up the land. Some of it they sold to the railways. Some of it they started coal mining. Well, being, good old American capitalist, they came in and they're like, we own the land, we own the people. They created company towns. They built the schools, they built the churches, they built the stores, they paid the workers in scrip. There was only redeemable at the company store. It was total servitude. Well, anyway, so the United Mine Workers were trying to organize this area in the early 20s. And as we've seen throughout American history, it happens time and time again. This is another thing that ties into today. Left-leaning social movements get met by government-sponsored violence. That's just what happened. It's what happened here in West Virginia. Well, in this case, in a little town called Matewan, the people stood up, and to be blunt, they shot back. And everything kind of kicked off with what's called the Battle of Matewan. The Chamber of Commerce crowd calls it the Matewan Massacre. But a local chief of police named Sid Hatfield, who was a mine worker supporter, met some Baldwin Felts detective agents who were coming in to evict miners who were standing up for their rights from company housing. A shootout ensued. 7 detectives were killed, including 2 of the brothers that owned the Baldwin Felts agency. 3 miners, including the mayor of Matewan, were killed. And from there, it just kicked off a series of events. And this is what Redneck Army, our show, starts just before this and follows through the next about 18 months, during which the coal operators tried to use the corrupt West Virginia judicial system to crack down on the miners. When that didn't work, they literally murder Sid on the courthouse steps, which leads to what was intended to be a march for their rights. The miners were going to march on Logan. There were miners who were frankly illegally being held by Logan County Sheriff Don Chapin and demand their freedom. Now, of course, there was some heated rhetoric there. There were people talking about hanging Chapin, which, we could spend the rest of your show arguing about whether that should have been done or not. By the end of this, and of course, it's
good people
there
on
are
both
different
sides,
numbers.
I hear.
Yeah, there are people on both sides, and it's one of the fascinating things about some of the literature. There are a couple of books out there that are very pro coal company that depict Don Chapin as just the shining knight of truth, justice, and the American way. Okay.
Right.
Well, anyway, this wound up with 10,000 armed coal miners facing off against 5,000. Combination of state police, sheriff's deputies, citizens organizations, frankly, mercenaries, and this, that, and the other, that erupted into a 7-day shooting war along a 21-mile front. And that's the story we're telling. Now, this goes on, and this is another thing that we're talking about in where we are now in forming the show. Another sort of interesting tie-in, and this actually kind of crosses some of the political lines a little bit. So you had the Battle of Blair Mountain. By the end of the battle, the federal government sent in troops. The leaders on the miner side, in my opinion, they realized at that point, it's like, okay, we're going to lose this. Once troops come in, they're going to do whatever they have to do, which means killing us. You also had quite a few. Estimates are about 10,000 of the miners were World War I veterans, and they did not want to fight against government troops. Well, anyway, they negotiated a peace. After that, the coal operators arrested about 550 of the miners, brought them up on murder charges, insurrection charges, but quite a few of them they brought up on treason charges. And they, in particular, brought Bill Blizzard, who was his nickname was Generalissimo, was considered one of the leaders of the march, up on treason charges. And so what we're doing with the show now is we're framing some of this story within Bill's treason trial. Because, just to be blunt with you, in television production, you want a hook that's going to get your audiences in, and audiences are seeing, just be blunt about it, the Trump trials. They're still hearing talk about the January 6th insurrection. Right. Well, this was the largest armed insurrection in U.S. history outside of the Civil War. It was for a good reason. But that's just another kind of tie-in to, contemporary times and seeing these issues still playing out. And just, going back to what you said in your intro about the management and things not changing. Whitney and I we were really kind of, to be honest, we kind of laughed about it. During the WGA strike last year, Bob Iger, the president of Disney, did this interview at some billionaires retreat. And I think it was aired on MSNBC or something. And we were just floored because we literally could have taken his speech verbatim. Everything he said in this interview, we could have taken it verbatim. The only thing we would have needed to change, he said, well, we haven't recovered from COVID yet. We can't afford to pay the writers. We haven't recovered from COVID. We could change the word COVID to the word flu. Because there was a flu epidemic in 1919. And one of the arguments that the coal operators made is, well, we haven't recovered from the flu epidemic. It's not reasonable for the miners to expect us to actually pay them now. We're still broke from the flu epidemic. We could have changed one word in Bob Iger's entire interview, and we could have dropped that verbatim in the Redneck Army.
Right. Well, and that might be a fun Easter egg for you to actually do. If you
that's a good point.
Once it comes to production, I think it would be very fun to actually put verbatim Bob Iger's words into one of the coal company's managers, because you're right. It's very similar, and there are definitely a lot of there are a lot of through lines as far in that story and in a lot of the stories that are happening today. You have just generally the constant struggle. Workers are not making enough money. They're working too much. They're working too hard. And management is trying to take trying to suck all of the money that they can out of these workers' bodies, and that's a constant. You have these people. Some of them, the largest, like you said, the largest armed insurrection in the history of the United States outside of the Civil War. And that's language that I don't know if you've ever heard Brother Cecil Roberts speak from the United Mine Workers of America. He says that like every time he speaks, he talks about the Battle of Blair Mountain, and he talks about how this was the largest armed insurrection in the history of the United States outside of since the Civil War. And you don't get a whole lot of those for good reasons. Right. So it's
and actually, President Roberts is Bill Blizzard's great nephew and Ma Blizzard's great grandson. Actually, President Roberts has read our pilot and loves it, and the mine workers are helping push us around on social media and some other things to build buzz for the show. Because he gets it. I mean, he is. He's a descendant, and that's another interesting thing about this story, talking about Ma, and this is all to Whitney's credit. This is part of the great thing about working with her. When you get into American labor history, not just here, but in Chicago and other places, women and people of color play such a crucial role in these fights. And we named this Redneck Army because you guys know the miners tied red bandanas around their necks. They wore blue overalls and tied red bandanas around their necks as a sign of racial unity, literally saying, look, we're not – the three main groups in Matewan at the time were white, black, and Italian. We're not of these different groups. We are rednecks. And so, that's part of what we're doing with the title, is trying to kind of reappropriate that word, because they intended it as a sign of unity. We're workers. We're all the same in this struggle. And you get in the story of Ma Blizzard and some of the women with this. It's so great. Like when the trials start taking place, this whole thing blows up. It goes viral for 1920, 1921, and newspapers from around the country come in and they're covering it and they're editorializing it, this and the other. Of course, the Chamber of Commerce crowd, they were pushing this. Oh, these are socialists. They hate America. They're trying to destroy everything we believe in. So the women during the day started running a pretty high-level PR campaign where they literally would just be out on the courthouse steps singing hymns all day and get in front of reporters and just saying, no, look, we're just good old Americans. Well, then also at night, they were running an espionage. Well, they were going out, let's say, doing things to hinder the ongoing operation of the coal mines.
You have to watch the show to figure out exactly what he means. That's
what I caught myself. I was like, well, don't give away too much of the show. It's just like, watch the show. And that's
warning. I haven't read the end yet, Mark.
Yeah. And that's so much fun to write, to get women like Ma Blizzard and some of these in there, because we've got such. It's one of the things that a lot of people don't know about the South. The U.S. has a very bloody and long labor history, but the South has a pretty vibrant labor history, but we just don't get taught that in our classrooms.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
I was this conversation came up on this program either last week or maybe a couple of weeks ago about how particularly in Alabama. I think in West Virginia they've somehow been able to retain something of that tradition that we haven't in Alabama. You saw the West Virginia teacher strike. Red bandanas were a very prominent feature during the strike, and there was explicit calls to their history with a lot of these women teachers talking about my granddaddy was in the miners union. My granddaddy talking about even the Battle of Blair Mountain. Those were things, and people. So there were a lot of people that knew their history and were calling back to it. And even though in Alabama we have even a more recent history than in West Virginia. The biggest things that happened in West Virginia were really the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and Alabama had a really vibrant, powerful labor movement up into the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and yet in Alabama, we, during the recent coal miners strike in 2021, 2022 at Warrior Met, the attempt to organize Mercedes by the UAW, and other labor and Amazon, I asked people about their history and if they knew anything about their family having been part of the rubber workers in Alabama or the steel workers or anything like that. And there was not as much as I would have hoped given Alabama's labor history. Right. And so, is that part of the reason that you want to do this program? Yes. and do it in kind of like a more of a mass media way to help expand the understanding of this history to more people?
Yeah, to get the story out there. Yeah, I come from a union family. I was going to tell you, Whitney, that we've got on here. I've got an aunt of mine who's communications workers. And yeah, we want to get that story out there. And Whitney and I have been working on it since 2020, and she came across the story and brought it to me, and then we started taking it from there. And yeah, that's what we talk about a lot. It's like, listen, our hope is that we not only get the story of these particular people out there, because in our mind, they're heroes and their story is worth telling, but we're hoping that, it could spark either us or other people doing some things. Like we've got one mentor of ours who has a play about union organizers in Chicago and Melody is a television writer. It's on her list. She's like, one day I would eventually like to get back to doing an adaptation of this. It came out a couple of months ago now, that Cillian Murphy is going to do a movie about the murder of a mine worker organizer in the West Virginia in the 60s. And so, we're kind of hoping, and some of it too, Gen Z is a very socially conscious generation. And the people that I know of that generation, because you can look at me and tell that I'm obviously not, they are more interested in these sorts of things. Just to be honest, in my day, an American history class was basically just American military history. We studied the Civil War, we studied World War II, nobody touched, Vietnam at that point. But now it seems like people want to know, call it forgotten history, alternative history, whatever, all of these stories that are out there. And I really think, one of the most brilliant pieces of television in my lifetime was the HBO adaptation of Watchmen. And Damien Lindelof and Core Jefferson, some of those writers, fantastic, fantastic writers. But what they did is they took the story of the destruction of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. Just straight up genocide here in the United States that never got taught, that your average American didn't know about. And to be frank about it, your average white American, if you brought up that story, would get all defensive. Oh, well, no, that wasn't me. I didn't have anything to do with that. Let's not talk about that. Well, what they did is they took that story and put it within the context of the graphic novel story of Watchmen. And what they did is they got a bunch of again, just to be frank about it, white dudes who sit around online, alt-right white dudes who would never have paid any attention to that story beforehand, paid attention to it because it was part of the story of Watchmen. And so at the end of the day, I firmly believe that art, storytelling, is how we change hearts and minds. And Whitney does too. And we've talked about this a lot with this work. So it's like, let's Let's try to get this story out there. Now, of course, you have to do that within the context of a good television show, or it doesn't get produced and no one ever watches it. So I will tell your audience here, I mean, we're very clear about saying this is inspired by the events of Blair Mountain, but there are some fictional characters. There are a couple of characters where we actually kind of had to take 2 or 3 real life characters and kind of combine them. Some of the timeline is a little bit telescoped, so it's not a documentary. It's not saying that this is exactly how it happened, but even doing that, you stick to the themes and stay within the parameters of the history. And I will say, actually, the producer that's on board with us now, this is the arena in which he works, these historical adaptations. And so you want to be very respectful of the history, and you don't want to change the story, but it's Peaky Blinders. We both love Peaky Blinders. If you know that show, it's actually based on real people and some real events that took place in Birmingham, England. Well, obviously, for example, we'll say no one knows the actual conversations that happened between these people. So you have to make some of that stuff up. So that's why we say this inspired. But yeah, absolutely. That was a very long answer to your question, but absolutely, we hope that this will spark interest in telling some more labor stories, because Tennessee's the same way. We had a labor school down in Sewanee that no one ever knows about. No one ever talks about.
Right. Well, and I mean the Highlander Folk School was another really interesting project in I think East Tennessee somewhere. Yep. And like you said, just so much of this history folks don't know and don't understand, or have never even heard about, and it's really a shame. I've talked to union organizers, people who are on staff, and people who have been part of union campaigns in their workplaces, and they're just like, man, this story would make a really crazy TV show. Like, people, you would not believe what went down, and folks would think that the true parts were fictionalized and fictionalized parts were true, and right. There's just so much. There's so much real good material out there, and I do hope that with this I think it's a movie that starring Cillian Murphy about the mine workers reformer who was assassinated late in the 1900s. I think that's gonna. I hope that's gonna be a great movie, and I hope that, and then this project will start to, that we'll start to see a trend of some of these stories. I think some of these things kind of come and go in trends. You had like Friends and like Seinfeld. They're people like they're people outside of work. That's kind of where everything was centered. And then now you have kind of the Office pattern of like workplace comedies, but you don't really see just a whole lot of like explicit mention of unions. There was like one union episode in Superstore, for instance, that was really good, but it wasn't kind of centered around that. And I think hopefully with this Cillian Murphy movie and with the creation of Redneck Army, we're going to see some more of that, and hopefully that'll help folks kind of relate to what has happened in other people's workplaces and inspire them to action in their workplace.
And like you said, I mean, there's so many great characters in all these stories. I mean, Sid Hatfield, this gunslinging guy with a gold grill in Ma Blizzard, this woman who was literally tearing up train tracks with a pry bar and things. And I mean, and it's, union people are just good folks. And I mean, like I said, there's so many of these colorful characters that, are just made for television and movies. So yeah, let's hope it catches on.
I hope so. So, the final question that I have, and then if anybody else has any questions, feel free to jump in. But the final question that I have is, I guess, what was the spark that kind of got you to say like, oh, I want to I'm going to write this script and I'm going to try to push it to get on TV. What was the thing that
Well,
made you
actually,
wanna
I mean,
go
what
down that
happened
road?
is kind of what you were just describing. Is Whitney saw the PBS series about the mine wars, and she said it just hit her. It's like, why have I never seen this? This is so cinematic. This is made for television. And so Whitney and I had met in an acting class, and she had done a table read for a feature script of mine. I've got some other scripts out on the market too. And so after that, she just asked me, said, "Hey, would you jump on a Zoom with me? I've got this idea I want to talk to you about." Well, we jump on a Zoom. 3 hours later, I mean, we got in and she just started telling the story. And we're talking about it. And coming from a union family, I had heard about Blair Mountain, but didn't really know the full story. And so, yeah, we just sat there. I mean, I'll never forget on that first Zoom for like 3 hours just going through this. It's like, yes, we got to tell this story, and just kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts of like screenwriting. Typically, if you've got kind of a story with a quick, for lack of a better way, beginning or ending, it's a feature film. A lot of times people will say, listen, if your protagonist is going to die, you've got a feature film. Now, if you know Game of Thrones, they kind of threw that out the window. But if it's kind of a self-contained little story, you got a feature film. You got 2 hours, you got one script, boom, done, you're out. If it's kind of ongoing, it's a television show. And once we got into it, it's like, well, yes, you've got the whole lead up to the Battle of Matewan. Then after the Battle of Matewan, you've got that whole period in between with the trials. And if you know the story, Sid and Jesse getting together and all this, that, and the other, and leading up to Sid's assassination. And then after that, the events that then go to the Battle of Blair Mountain, followed by the trials and this, that, and the other. So we looked at it. It's like, we've kind of got these historical markers that make season breaks. It's like this story actually kind of lays itself out as a television show. And so that's the way we put it together. And then, like I said, again, just kind of getting off into the ins and outs of TV production a little bit. Right now, we're working with the producer and some other people to decide, okay, exactly how is this going to look? Can we do this? The blunt reality is, will someone pay us to do all this, or are they going to pay us to do something else? And so, yeah, it just really felt like a television show. And then, of course, once we got into it and started, we got to know these characters and things like, oh, yeah, we've got the material. This is far more than a television show. I mean, if you know the Queen's Gambit, for example, that took 40 years to get made. And it was really a matter of kind of the technology catching up, because people tried to do it as a movie for about 30 years, and it just never worked because you couldn't tell the story in 2 hours. Well, once streaming came along and then the limited series came about, then Scott Frank was able to do it as a limited series, 8 one-hour episodes, because he said there wasn't enough story there to go on for 3-4 seasons. There wasn't enough story there for, 40 shows. So, but there was way more than 2 hours worth of story. And so, yeah, that's the television market now is just made for this sort of story, because again, that's what we kind of think about with Redneck Army. It's like, okay, this is like a 3-season series. It's not a season. It's not Gunsmoke. You're not going to go on for 21 seasons with this story, but you've got far more than just a movie.
Right. Well, Adam, Whitney, do y'all have anything?
You can go ahead, Whitney. I just wanted to say I appreciated everything you're doing, and this heritage that we have as working class people, we have to reclaim it. And I absolutely agree that art is a way to reach people. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
don't think I have anything. Oh, sorry.
Oh, and I was just going to mention, Jacob, you mentioned the strikes in Alabama, and we were talking about art, but Tom Morello, the guitarist for Rage Against the Machine, came down and did some concerts in support of those strikes in Alabama. He's a huge mine worker supporter.
There.
You were there? Oh, cool.
I was there. Yeah, I was there for the Tom Morello concert. Yeah, I had a good time.
I will say, in Hollywood parlance, our people are talking to Tom Morello's people, because we would love to get him involved in this show, even if he just did a song or something. But I'm sorry, Whitney, I totally interrupted you.
Oh, no, I was just saying, yeah, thank you for, it sounds like this is a really interesting production, and I appreciate you getting telling the stories of the people that are sort of forgotten in the labor movement, including women and people of color. I think that's really critical to telling these stories now. So thank you for, being inclusive in that way.
Well, thanks for, thanks for having me. And you guys keep your fingers crossed, and you know what they say, manifest this. We're in the process, and we hope to have this on a screen soon. And we totally agree with, like I said, again, why they tied those bandanas around their necks. At the end of the day, we're working people. We got to come together, and, because the folks with all the capital work together and have plenty of people working on their behalf.
Yep, that's right. Mark Brown, Nashville screenwriter. We are rooting for you, as is Vonda McDaniel. She's in the chat. President of the Nashville Labor Council. She's a fan, and was the one that got me in touch with you, or told me to reach out to you. So appreciate her making this happen, and appreciate you for putting in the work to get Redneck Army on the screen.
Okay. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll be following that, and look forward to telling y'all where and when you can see it when it comes on.
Well, now that it's been
TV.
on the Valley Labor Report.
That's right. Yeah, now
you got
it's
the
only
TVLR bump.
That's right. It's only a matter of time since it's been on the only union radio program in Alabama, and the biggest one in the southern United States, on 4 stations in 3 states. I think
Good
that
work.
is 3 states enough to start saying we're a nationally syndicated radio program?
Absolutely.
Appreciate the support.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.